Hello. Welcome everybody on the internet. This is our first author talk. Today we will be having Tanya Boteju on with us to talk about her new book, or actually her first book, not her new book, Kings, Queens, and In-Betweens. We read this for book club last week, and I'm so happy and honored to welcome Tanya and have a discussion with her about her book, her writing. Um, yeah, welcome, Tanya. Here you
Hello.
are.
Thanks for having me. I'm so,
Of,
so happy to be here.
of course, I'm truly honored. We spoke a little bit about how you are my first ever author I've ever talked to.
Ah,
Um,
yay.
and
So
I
exciting.
was a huge fan of the book, and folks from the book club were also a huge fan of the book. So I'm really happy I get to sit down and talk to you about it.
Me too. Thank you.
Yeah. So do you wanna first tell folks a little bit about yourself, like introduce yourself? I don't, hopefully I didn't screw up your name.
No, you
Um,
said it very well.
your
Thank you.
pronouns, maybe a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. So I am Tanya Boteju. I live on the West Coast, on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, also known as Vancouver, BC. I am a teacher and a writer here. I've been teaching for 20 years. I've been writing professionally for about 5 or 6 now. Kings, Queens, and In-Betweens was my first book, a young adult book, and my second book, Bruised, came out last year. It's also young adult. Fun fact, I used to be a drag king, which led to me writing this book, really. I love both my jobs. I love teaching and I love writing, and they definitely feed each other. I love doing these events. So, really, really happy to be here with whoever else is here. I can't see you, but thanks for coming if you are.
I also cannot see them, but they are there, and it'll be archived on our YouTube. So if folks can't catch our live stream, then they can just go back and watch it. So yeah, we said that your first book was Kings, Queens, and In-Betweens. You have a second book, Bruised. Um, but this was your first book, and it was a beautiful book, a beautifully written book with wonderful characters. Um, how was the writing process like for this first book? And actually, first, let me ask you, what do you teach? Do you teach English?
I do. Yeah, I teach high
Okay.
school English. Yeah, and I taught creative writing for many years as well. So,
Okay. So
yes,
that kind of leads you into the life of becoming an author.
correct. Yeah, I kind of did things backwards. I taught creative writing before I actually did most of my own. I've
Mhm.
always dabbled, but never really wrote for an audience, thinking that it was going to be for an audience until about 5 or 6 years ago when I started writing Kings. I had sort of, I guess, reached a point in my teaching career where I was ready for something else
Mhm.
into the mix. And I had always thought maybe that I'd try writing for an audience. And since being a drag king, I kind of had a sense that, like there's a story there. This community is amazing. And I had such a great time in it. I wanted to share it with people in some way. And so when I sat down and started writing, I just started writing from this kid's voice. She eventually became Nima. But when I first met her on the page, she really was just this 17-year-old kid living in a small town who was somehow going to discover drag. And that's really all I knew at the beginning. And so I got writing and really just started writing in her voice, basically letting her introduce herself to me. And that turned into Kings, Queens, and In-Betweens.
That's beautiful. What was like the writing process like? Did you sit down and you said, I think I'm gonna write a book, or were you just kind of writing and then all of a sudden it became this novel and you were like, I'm gonna share this?
Yeah, I think it was more I sat down knowing I was going to try and write a book. I had
Mm-hmm.
no idea really what that looked like. I'd never tried it before. I hadn't, I don't have a master's in creative writing or anything like that. I hadn't really taken any creative writing courses. All I knew about creative writing was from teaching it and having to teach myself in order to teach it. And then learning from my students too, because they're really smart and amazing and
Mhm.
really great writers. And so I was kind of flying by the seat of my pants to some extent. I had no idea, like, I don't even know what sort of inspired me to sit down and monologue from this character's voice as the first thing that I wrote. But it
Mhm.
ended up being something that I've used a lot in my writing. I often start that way. Whatever my protagonist is in my head, I'll just start writing from their voice, and letting them, share what they have to share in sort of free writing form, just to get to know them, which I find really helps me. It's, different from what some writers might do. They kind of maybe
Mhm.
discover their characters a bit more as they write, and that happens too, for sure. But I just like to get to know them really well at the beginning, and it just feels like the right thing to do for me. So I've done that for both books so far, and then the books that I'm working on right now.
There's there's more in the works.
Hopefully. Well, I haven't sold anything yet, but yes, they are being written. So
That is beautiful. I'm very excited. I haven't read Bruised yet, but I will definitely pick it up because I mean, as an adult, I don't really think about reading young adult novels because I
Mhm.
think, oh, like those are for children.
Yeah.
But and during our book club discussion, I asked people, which we were all adults, I am assuming, and I'm pretty sure I'm correct. Um, I asked people like, is this the first time you picked up a young adult novel as an adult and read it? And most people said yes. One person said no. And they talked about reading young adult novels as an adult sort of like puts them back into a sort of like comforting place and like a place of like um how would you say just like what's the word,
Like, not
innocence, I guess.
okay.
you know um
Yes.
so yeah, this was my first time reading a young adult novel as an adult, and I can't even imagine writing a young adult novel as an adult. Um, do your kids, like your students, I mean, inspire you to write young adult? Like, what was the
Mhm.
purpose behind writing like a young adult novel?
Yeah, well, I'm sort of in the same boat. Before I started writing young adult, or before I started writing Kings, I hadn't really read a lot of young adult. I mean, I read some books as a kid, Anna Green Gables or whatever.
Mhm.
But it's such a huge genre now, and I hadn't really read most of the books that had come out. You know, in these past 10 years or 15 years. And then I started reading a ton, like a lot of queer YA, just to see what was out there and inform myself as I was writing Kings, and fell in love with it. Like, there's so much good YA right now. And a lot, actually, like a huge percentage of people who read YA are adults. It's
Mhm.
not unusual. And now I always have a YA book on the go, partly to like inform my writing, but also just because there's so many really great ones out there. Um, so when I started writing this book, I don't think I knew it was going to necessarily be YA. I didn't set out to write YA, but it was just a natural progression. I wanted to write a book that, I definitely would have wanted to read when I was a kid. I drew inspiration from my students, as you mentioned, from, their struggles and like how they talk to each other and their
Mhm.
friendships, what I've seen over the past 20 years teaching them. And a huge inspiration was like, in addition to drag, was a lot of the queer kids I teach, like seeing them express themselves or not, or, struggle or like really live, and wanting to like write for them too. That was a huge piece of it. And so it just felt like the right story for a young audience who is discovering themselves, figuring themselves out, and needed like to see that queerness is awesome and beautiful and joyful. That was a big, I guess, an inner commitment I had with the book was, I tried to follow the story naturally to its ending, but I was pretty committed to a joyful ending. Um, which, you know, like there's lots of stories and they should all be told. But for me, it was really important to bring like joy to queerness, as at least for this first book. Who knows, maybe I'll write something dark and awful later, but for now, you know, I'm still pretty committed to bringing mostly joyful stories into the mix.
Yeah, and that's such an important thing. I personally read a lot of memoirs, a lot of queer memoirs, and um, like as you know, as a queer person, we go through a lot of trauma, a lot of tragedy, and most of the books I read are just really heavy. And to have read something
Mhm.
so pure and light and um like easy in the sense that I just kind of like breezed through it without having to like take a pause. I mean, there were some rough patches in here. I don't want to spoil anything for people, but there's some hard times in here, but just reading something like light, pure was refreshing is
Yeah.
a good word to say.
And I'm actually
And
happy to hear you say that, because that is what I was going for. And it, you know, one of my like cozy time books is Fried Green Tomatoes by Fanny Flagg.
yes,
You know, a bit older. It was written in the 80s, and it's, you know, it has such innocence and this like small town charm to it. And it is like my go-to summer breezy book, you know, even though
yeah,
it has some hard stuff in it too. But and that book, definitely the tone or the flavor of that book really influenced my writing of this book too, in terms of what I was trying to do with the atmosphere and the small town, and, you know, Nima's naivety and that kind of thing. Then it is innocence,
absolutely.
I guess. Yeah.
I can definitely see the resemblance between the two, and I'm absolutely here for it. I love it. Okay, so one of our biggest questions in book club, something that we talked about, um, no our book club discussion had a lot of um uh like culture in drag. Like none of us had really ever like dipped our toes in performing drag or have ever really been to many drag shows. Like I myself have been to maybe like 4 drag shows in my life. Um and we were really impressed by how thoughtful and deep like the backstages of drag was in this book. Like you outlined how Nima, got involved in drag. It was a whole journey about how she, first saw her first drag show and then ended up, um I don't want to spoil anything. Ended up in the world of drag. Um and so we were curious as to what your story was with drag. I mean, you can Google anything, right? And yeah, I even tried to Google some drag stuff, but I did not get as much detail um, as you would need to, write this book. So you did drag, like you were a drag king, still are a drag king?
No, it's like such late nights, and I'm such a little old bitty
Oh,
now. It doesn't
you're
really work with
telling me. You are telling I am 24 years old and I go to bed at 10 o'clock every day.
Yeah, yeah, so I don't do drag still, but I did, for many years in my 20s, a little bit in my 30s here and there too, and, just loved it so much. It brought so much to my life and lots of friendships, you know, and just this whole new way of expressing myself. And, you know, when I see drag now, I'm like, oh my God, I was such like small bit compared to what I see. Just even locally, our Vancouver has an amazing drag scene.
Mm.
And you know, like the makeup, everything is just 100 times more than anything I ever did. But I was having so much fun. And so I definitely pulled from my own experience, but I had to do some research. You know, I got to interview a bunch of drag performers from around here, who I really admire, and get some of the more, you know, updated versions of drag, the like moving forward of drag, you know, into that in between space. um,
Mhm.
the, you know, the intricacies of the makeup, the just the scene itself. And it's changed a lot since I was doing it. And so, but that was like the most fun research you can do, right? So I mean, I'm glad that it feels, it feels like a rich sort of background or atmosphere, because it was important to me that to do it justice.
Mhm. Yeah, all right. So yeah, you pulled that aspect from your past life. What about Nima? Nima was a very complex character. She had a lot going on. Um, where did the inspiration for Nima? I know you talked a little bit about just writing from um your character's perspective and just kind of taking it off, but did Nima come from anywhere or anyone?
Yeah, I mean, there's maybe more of me in me, Nima, than I care to admit. More so of me in her than in, my next protagonist in Bruise, for instance. Her kind of like, I'm nerdy now, but I was a bit nerdy in high school and kind of awkward, or I felt awkward, definitely, and felt, like she feels at the beginning, kind of, I felt ugly, I felt weird, I felt like I didn't fit in so many different ways. And I also am a huge introvert. I love my hammock and book, just like she does. Um, and so there's that part of things, and then I mean, lots of it is fictional as well, to fit the story. But she is definitely quite a bit of me in lots of different ways, I think. But it was funny, when I started writing from her perspective at the beginning, that voice really just sort of came through. Her voice is, I think, different from my own voice, but she
Mhm.
um yeah, a lot of that early sort of free writing, um, brainstorming kind of on the page actually came through into the final book, and some of those details came through because they were just kind of neat. They were things that I wouldn't have necessarily thought about if I'd sat down and thought really hard of a good character, about a good character.
Mhm.
It kind of came more easily as I just opened up to like what was possible. Because I see the question from the audience as well about how do you
Yeah.
get past writer's block or tackle the daunting task of writing a whole book. It is a huge task. Like writing an entire book to the end is difficult. I think people, including myself, start things, right? Start stories, and we have ideas maybe, but writing all the way through is really, really difficult and takes time and perseverance and a certain amount of just like sit your butt down and do it.
Mhm.
But for me, that free writing piece is like the key to getting past the writer's block piece because and my students are probably so tired of me hearing me talk about this, but for me, writer's block is I wouldn't say it's a real thing. Like I would say that we can always write,
Mhm.
but it's our unwillingness to write garbage that stops us. So like I can always get words on the page or on my computer screen, but they might be terrible. And if I'm okay with that, then I can always write, And so free writing for me is the act of just allowing myself, giving myself permission to write garbage, knowing that it takes garbage to get to the good stuff. That's always the case. Like I write way more garbage than I write good words. So I think once you once you get a certain understanding for that, it makes it easier. It's still hard. You still want to be perfect and write beautiful things all the time, but it gets easier for me when I remind myself, like, it's okay. Like nobody needs to see this. Like I'm just going to get
Mhm.
this out. And eventually, for me, if I trust the process of free writing, I 100% of the time, it gets me to something good, whether it's like one sentence or just past not writing, or having words to go back and revise. You can't revise what's not there. So
Yeah, that is why drafts are so important. As a student, I hated drafting and revising, and then I went to school for English, and I was like, nope, this is actually very important because
yeah,
everything you just said is very true, very true.
yeah, it's
So
absolutely.
you wrote this book from beginning to end. It wasn't like a sort of let's piece this together because now I want to talk about the ending a little bit.
Mm. I Once I'd monologued and written a bunch of stuff from Nima's perspective, and then finally sat down to write the story. I wrote maybe like, I don't know, about 2/3 of it, and uh, then I actually went back and changed a significant moment, which
Mm,
changed the trajectory of the book, and so I had to sort of rewrite, like that second third, and then I got stuck at the 2/3 mark, and had to pause and start to map things out. So I didn't map things
mm,
out from the beginning. Some people do, but I tend to just start writing the story after I've looked at the character a bit and let them sort of take me through as far as we can go together. But I usually do get stuck at some point and have to stop, and take stock of what I have and think about like plot, a little bit more, major events, the arc of the character, and start to try to tease out a bit more of a plot to the end. And then I'll continue writing, and things will change like 1,000 times, before I
mhm.
finally get to the final draft of the book. But I would say I'm a we call it like plotter or pantser. I don't know if you've heard these terms, but a plotter is a plotter is somebody who like plots out their book beforehand, and then starts writing. A pantser is like you fly by the seat of your pants and you just like write.
Oh,
Yeah, they're weird terms.
I
Um,
like that.
so I'd say I'm somewhere in between. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's probably that to me sounds harder. If I was going to sit down and write something, I would like to plan everything, but that also might just be the Aries in me. Um,
Mm.
um, but yeah, I mean, it was beautifully written. The storyline was incredible. The end, like you said, had there was a joyful ending. It was a happy ending. We have a little bit of a resolve with Nima. The only person that I was really itching to like get to know more of um was Gordon. Gordon was, I think, everybody's favorite character in book club. Um Definitely the most complex character and definitely the character that everybody recognized.
Mm.
Um and you know, I love these kinds of like they're like a not a cliffhanger, but like a character cliffhanger where we don't really know what happens to Gordon in the end, but
Right.
like we can hope, right? Like I am thinking that if Gordon had lived past these pages, like he would be somewhere beautiful, like on the other side of the rainbow. Um,
Yes, totally. You should
yeah.
write that fan fiction.
Oh my gosh, don't even get me started because I did write fan fiction.
That's
And
awesome.
now that's on the internet.
Amazing. Yeah, well, Gordon comes up a lot. Poor Gordon. I know he's at the start of his journey for sure. By the end of that
Mhm.
book, things are not clear to him, and so they're not clear to us. It felt right to me that he was where he was at. And it's funny actually. I did start writing a book, after I finished Kings. I started writing a book that had Gordon and Deirdre, as the central characters. And I wrote, like a fair amount, about a quarter of it, I guess. And my editor at the time didn't love it, which I can definitely see what she was saying at the time. But it's sitting there. Maybe I'll come back to it. We'll see. But because I also wanted to see what happens with Gordon and write him his rainbow story too, because I think he
Mhm.
deserves it. And I think Deidre is somebody who also deserved her own character arc, and I wanted to find out what she was like as a kid too. So I was trying to, go back in time a
Yes.
little bit to see how she became who she was.
Oh, I would love that. I wanna give Deidre a huge hug.
Me too. I think I wanted
She
Deidre to give me a hug. Really, is why. You know.
Yeah, exactly. She
Mhm.
was, like, the mom, basically, like, the role model Nima did not have for the, what, 2 years, um, that Nima's mom was away. She
Mhm.
was an incredibly beautiful character and a huge role model, and I think it's really important for not only kids to understand that there are people like that, but also like adults. Like even me reading this book, I was like, wow, kids really need this person who will love them for no matter who they are and will, advise them to the best of their abilities. Deidre wasn't like the type of person who was um giving the kind of advice like, oh well, I would do this, you know. She was like you have to, like, kind of guiding them instead of like teaching, but not telling
Mm,
them is what
mm,
I would say.
mm. Yeah, well,
Y-
she's kind of the elder too, right? Like she's that elder queer character who is so important. I don't know. I didn't have a lot when I was younger, and I wish I had, but
Mm.
eventually, I had a few older people in my life in my 20s and 30s, and it really was a comfort, and it was so like there's that wisdom there that I really appreciated and grew from. And so Deidre came from like basically a couple of places, me wanting, somebody like that, kind of creating my own best friend. And then, and actually her inspiration, I discovered kind of, I was doing it subconsciously, I guess, but she resembles one of my best friends quite a bit, actually. So,
Aw,
yeah, so that was kind of a fun discovery.
that's very sweet. Yeah. I talked a little bit in book club about how uh I will be reading more young adult novels now just because I feel like this book healed a little bit of my inner child. Um, Not in like a therapizing kind of way, just like in a, oh my goodness, like someone out there has a very similar story to this.
Mm,
And I am so happy to know that someone out there has this
yeah.
similar story, a
Yes.
story that's different from mine, you know, and a story that's different from a lot of queer folks just because we grew up. I'm a young person who grew up in a very like out world, um like, you know, not in
Close.
the 70s or the 50s
Yeah.
or,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Totally.
um so it just was very healing for me to read this book as a queer person looking at another queer person's
Experience. Yeah.
experience. Yeah,
Well, that is, I
exactly.
think that's what we often sometimes get out of books, right? Is just like a knowledge that um either there's other people like us, or we understand and experience a bit more, right? Or we're just sort of like nourished, or as you say, healed by the characters healing, right? Or the wisdom that they share with us, that kind of thing. So, books are really magic, medicine, all of
Absolutely.
it.
Absolutely. Um, I want to go back on Gordon really quickly, just because I had a personal question.
Hmm.
Um, there's this scene, and it's like we've seen Gordon a few times now. School is out. Nima is running late to participate in a fundraiser. She's going to the school. She's in the art room, and she sees Gordon. Um, or yeah, does she sees Gordon and he's like trying to hide something or like looking at something, and it's a like a photo of him altered. Is that correct? I was a little confused about that, but I felt
Yeah.
like that was a really important scene.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, it's like this is kind of, I think, the first time. It's so hard when you're talking about books that you wrote like 5 years ago, but
I know.
yeah, no, but I remember.
Sorry, didn't mean to get
No, it's okay.
specific.
I remember the scene, but I am, I believe it's the first time that we see like this different side, to Gordon, or that there might be something there that we would never have expected. That he is in the art room, working on
Hmm.
art by himself, which seems really out of character. And then, as Nima discovers, the art that he's working on is, this sort of like manipulation of his body, of himself, that's both like angry but also artistic, and shows, I mean, starts to show at least that something is up with this person that Nima had never expected, and something that's obviously threatening to him too, because he's trying to hide it, and then he gets really pissed when she brings it back to him. So, it is definitely an important scene. It was a scene that, yeah, I rewrote a few times trying to figure out how to sort of reveal this part of him in a way that felt right for the character, even though it doesn't feel right for the character. Like in that moment, it feels really strange. But I think that's important to note too. Like people have these many sides that are unexpected, and we might not understand everything that people are going through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like especially towards like bullies. Um
Yeah.
not there's like the whole thing like bullies are misunderstood, but like and even I think it was Jill in the book who said like um oh gosh, now I'm trying to remember a quote that she said. She said
They're hurt. Sometimes, yeah, I can't remember either, but
yes, hurt
sometimes,
people.
yeah, a heart, a bad soul is a hurt soul or something like that, right?
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The people are hurting and then
exactly.
they act in like shitty ways, right? Like I mean, when
Exactly.
I'm hurt or, sad or frustrated or whatever, that's when I'm at my worst, and
Mhm.
we say things we might not mean or we do things we might not usually do. I think that's often the case. I don't, and I would never like excuse bullying I don't think it's about that. I think it's just that, um, that there's almost always a reason, I would say, for the most part, that people act the way they act. That it's hard to understand sometimes in the moment if they're being hurtful or cruel or anything like that. But there's something underlying, there's something behind that often.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, towards the end of the book, Gordon absolutely was my favorite character. I think from the beginning, he was a little bit of my favorite. I was very interested in him from the beginning. You know, he kept like popping up and I was like, okay, I I definitely caught the bait with this character. Um and his character arch, Gordon in the beginning of the book, Gordon in the end of the book were completely different people in
Mm.
my opinions. And I think I saw a little bit of myself in him in the end. His like, oh, I'm too cool for all of this, but like I'm very interested in this
Yeah.
drag show, so I'll stay, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, yeah, he's still definitely, like, got his shield up for sure, and, he's really at the beginning of that, like, he's not as ready to, tackle everything that he's just revealed, right? But he's
Hmm.
revealed it, and that's a start. It's a big
Absolutely.
start. Yeah.
It looks like we have another question from Patrick. He's asking, can you speak to what it means to create queer characters and queer stories versus maybe a more mainstream story?
Mhm. So, I mean, for me to write queer characters just came very naturally. There was no way I was not writing queer characters. Um, Again, sort of because I think those stories need to be told and there need to be more and more and more of them so we can see the variety that it's out there. I feel like there's a certain responsibility with telling those stories or creating those characters. Especially if you're writing for young people, to like it's important for me to have a variety of representation, but also be responsible about that representation or be make that representation as meaningful as possible versus like a checkbox or um, just something to pop in to make sure I'm covering all my bases.
Hmm.
Um, so for I mean, again, like both of my protagonists in both books are queer. The books I'm writing now, the protagonists are queer. I'm not sure I'll ever write a straight character, to be honest. It doesn't feel natural or right to me, to be honest. But I also don't want to get stuck in like writing one queer story or, like that all queer stories are the same or that they're all coming out stories or not coming out stories. And so, yeah, I guess I'm always thinking about the queerness around me, like what I see. And what I see right now is like a vast variety and fluidity of gender and sexuality. Like in the students I teach, I mean, I've got grade eights in my gender and sexuality alliance who are, just playing with pronouns at this stage, experimenting and trying to figure out what feels right to them. And they might come in one day and use they them pronouns, and the next day it's he him. Um, and so I'm just seeing like that gray area so much more, and so trying to capture that a bit more in my books. Like even my second book, Bruised, my protagonist Aya is never defines herself. She's been dating boys and then, meets a girl and begins a relationship with her and never really decides, I'm bisexual, I'm this, I'm that. She just is. She's just doing her thing with who she's attracted to. And even with Deidre, like Deidre never really defines herself as transgender. She is a drag queen. She's a warrior. She's, all of these other things. And she uses she, her pronouns. But, she is just who she is, she's just existing in the gender that she, feels right to her and never really defines that. I think that to me, it just feels really right to what I see in the world around me at this stage. And then we also have characters who do, identify as certain things because I see that too. So I guess I'm just sort of thinking constantly about what is accurate to the world around me and how do I represent that meaningfully.
Yeah, I mean, you said you don't think you're ever going to write a straight character, and it's like, yeah, we have so many,
We need
you know,
yeah.
so many books. We really do need queer characters all across the spectrum,
Mhm.
highlighted in everything, books, media, television, whatever.
Mhm.
Um, so people know that we've always been there. We're
Mhm.
continuing to be here, spread our words, spread our truths. Um,
Yeah.
and I think it's important for kids now who have access to the internet to know that there are like good queer representing characters and people in the world.
Mhm. Well, and complex, right? Like, so
And
the more of these stories we have, the less pressure there is to like represent everybody. You know what I mean? That there's that too. I find that even with like my protagonists are both brown. And so there is some pressure to like somehow represent all brownness when there's so many stories, right? And brown means a lot of different things, and brown people are from a lot of different places and have lots of different experiences. And so I just feel like if we have this critical mass, then the pressure is off, right? Because we're just seeing, okay, so actually we have two stories about two brown girls who are the same age and grow up in the same place, but their lives are completely different because that's true, that's real.
Mhm.
And so there's less pressure to represent a whole group of people because we only have 4 books, that deal with the queerness or brownness or whatever it is. Because that's what we see with, straight stories or white stories or whatever they are. There's so many of them.
Mhm.
Nobody's asking any white person to represent all white people, right? So we just need more, 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 more.
That is a good point. That is a
Mhm.
good point. Let me see what else. I got lost in that conversation.
That's a good conversation then.
Ooh, okay. So here's a question from one of our book club members. And it's about a character, a small but important character. Um, this person was asking, and we were trying to figure out why the dad. Why did you send the dad away? So towards the end of the book, when things are really, they're up there, it's at its peak. Nima's dad, which I don't think has a name. Correct me if I'm wrong.
He does have a name. What is it? Gosh, I can't even remember. You never think you're gonna forget the names of
I
your characters, but
know.
you definitely do. Um,
And even me,
Del,
just
Del,
reading this.
Del, Del something. Delford. That's his.
Okay.
It's
Yes.
like once or twice in there, but yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot
No, no,
there.
it's fine.
Because yeah, she just referred to him as my dad or dad.
Mhm.
So Nima's dad goes away on a road trip with his buddy. Was that to help Nima, like, sort of do her thing? Like, she went off, she did her thing. Jill was in charge of her, but Jill is not really her parent.
Mhm.
So one of her book club members asked, "Why did you send the father away?" When the father was also a very he was a very chill dad, like,
Totally.
and he was very super open to Nima's explorations.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, first of all, it's
Oh, sorry, that was my Apple Watch.
that's all right. Did you get your steps today? Or whatever. I don't know how
No,
these
I've
things
been
work.
sick.
Um, I so in a lot of YA, you'll notice as you read more, you kind of have to get rid of the parents at some, like in some way, shape, or form. That you, 'cause
Okay.
it's not always, but it's like it does tend to be a bit of a trope that the parents are either absent or possibly not living anymore. But that's often to give the kids space to do something that they might not do otherwise, right? A bit more freedom. And you're right, like she had a very open father who accepts her as she is. What that absence does is open up the space for her to connect with Jill, and to start, I believe, God, I'm getting this right,
Mhm.
where they're able to open up with one another, and Jill's able to share the story, be with about what she shares. And
Mhm.
so that's a bit tender, right? For Nima's father, that situation might be harder for him than Nima coming out or being queer. And so it kind of had to, I know for me, it had to happen sort of in a separate space, or where Nima's kind of like doing her own thing, and has to spend a bit more time with Jill for some reason, to bring them closer, or kind of closer, or at least open them up to each other.
Mhm.
I think that was my thinking.
Yeah. This question just popped up in my head. I'm realizing actually now that Nima has a lot of um adults that she can turn to. And as a young queer person, that's not always necessarily the case.
Mhm.
Usually, again, speaking from my personal experience, I turned to friends. Like I shut off adults and I was like, adults are not safe. I'm coming to friends, to my community, to my chosen family.
Yeah.
And, you know, Nima is finding chosen family, she's finding the queer crowd. But she has, you know, her dad, Jill, Deidre, uh, all sort of looking out after her. Did you sort of intentionally write these safe adults, or did I just pick up on something?
No, I think you picked up on what I was putting down, which
Mhm,
is, that like I want, I spend all this time with teenagers, and it's very natural to like for teenagers to turn to their friends. That I think that happens a lot. And there's such value in them having safe adults to talk to, and then it's something I want to like encourage constantly, because your friends can give you so much, but there is something that a safe adult, who has a certain amount of wisdom or lived experience, can also share, in a way that maybe teenagers can't always, right? Like I honor teenagers so much. I think some of them have so much wisdom too, but it is a different time of life. They haven't experienced as much. They might not have as clear an understanding of some things, as some adults. And so I guess for me, even my second book, there's a ton of older characters. Part of it's like really honoring the like elder part of things, because I think that gets left out of the story a lot.
mhm,
But also part of it is like hopefully teenagers will also pick up on this idea that there are safe adults. Like there are, you might not always feel it, like, but there might not be, right there next to you in your house or across the street, but they might be, through this organization, or you know what I mean. Like there are avenues to finding safe adults to be there for you, mentors, role models. So just trying to like put that into their world and space a little bit more, I think, is part of
yeah,
that. And also just like again, more of what I wished, I had as a kid, are these adults who were awesome, or like
mhm.
super hilarious or chill or whatever it is, that would have given me a bit more space to be myself.
Yeah. I think maybe I honestly like, it probably just went over my head, but because I was always like, adults are not safe, and I had just realized how many safe adults Nima has, and
Mm,
that's probably why, this book was so tender for me. I was like, "Oh, man, I wish I had this
yeah.
experience." Um, you did you briefly mention that you were the GSA, what do you say, like, advocate
Well,
or
so we call it
teacher?
like sponsor teacher. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Advisors. Yeah. Yeah.
advisor, yes.
Yeah.
Um, do you feel like kids sort of are, I mean, I was not in my high school GSA, so I know nothing about GSA, back then or now. Do you
Hmm.
feel like kids, really open up in GSA, like, see you as a person that they can talk to? I mean, I'm sure you're the GSA advisor.
Well, I mean, you'd be surprised, but I mean, yes, and oh, and I hope so. I mean, I'm very out and queer at my school too, so I think that helps. But they, yeah, it goes through ebbs and flows for sure. I've had quieter GSAs, and this year I've got a bunch of grade eights who are not quiet at all and very smart and very quick, and so they're chatty Cathys and are constantly going off. But um, I do feel like they say things in the GSA or even express themselves. Like a lot of them will use certain pronouns in the GSA that they don't use outside of that room,
Mm,
or like a bunch of them sort of congregate right outside my classroom, and a lot of those kids are queer. It's like they've formed their own little GSA outside of the room, and so their conversations I kind of overhear, and they're definitely talking in ways that they probably don't talk in their classes or whatever. So I think I see kids kind of suss out for themselves who is safe and who won't judge them also for being, because a lot of the queer kids are kind of quirky and awesome little weirdos, and the ones with the colored hair and are a little bit messy, and because they're trying to figure things out, and
mhm,
people don't love that. Like it's just easier to like the kids who got it all together and were polite or whatever. But I think they understand who just sees them for like messy kids and so that's okay. It's just part of things, and so I hope the vast majority see me that way. Some of them might not. I mean, some of them again don't see any adult as safe. And that's fair. I get it. Why? I get why.
mhm.
Yeah.
And, maybe Canadian schools, I mean, I know Canada is much more liberal than America is.
Yes.
Um, in American schools, I know I had a GSA, and I know who the teacher was, and, um, teachers here, I mean, not when and I'm only 24, so I graduated high school at 2016, so I'm not that old, so I did recently go to high school, so I feel like I know what I'm talking about a little bit, but, I I don't see queer presenting teachers. I didn't, at least not in my high school, and I actually went to one of the biggest high schools in Connecticut, and we had one, like, visibly out, white gay man teacher,
Yes.
who, have the most amount of privilege out of all of us.
Mhm. Yes.
Um, do you feel like being out and queer is like, safe in Canada? And does it help your students, kind of signal you as someone they can turn to?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's going to be different all across Canada, but I mean, yes, to some extent, I guess Canada isn't quite as steeped in some of the nonsense that's happening in the States right now, and has happened. But I mean, we definitely have our more conservative parts of the country. And so where it is likely similar, where it's not as safe or feels as safe to be out as a teacher. My school feels fairly safe at this stage. But that's taken time to build that culture. And we have some pretty progressive like laws and statutes and things like that in our education system that actually make space for that, which is really amazing.
Oh, definitely.
Around sexual orientation and gender identity. Like these are things that are protected by our human rights code. And so they have to be, expressed and shared in our education system in British Columbia and some of the other provinces. That's like written in. Schools have to address that and make safe spaces. So that's amazing, obviously. But it still doesn't necessarily mean that every teacher is going to feel comfortable. And it definitely doesn't mean that every student feels comfortable coming out, even in that kind of space. Because it's still really hard to come out, even in this current more progressive kind of environment. And then, of course, then you have like places like Florida and Texas or what all these places that are just making it terrible. So who knows, it's a constant fight, battle, ebb and flow again of trying to make sure that these safe spaces stay safe. It doesn't take much for things to slide backwards. So I feel like, I don't want to say lucky, but I feel privileged, I guess, and happy that I am where I am and can be who I am there. And I do think that it makes a huge difference for students to see that. I really do.
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't it have made a huge difference for you? It definitely would have made a huge difference for me, just to even see. It might not have made me come out any earlier, but just to see somebody living their life and being queer and being okay, I think that would have made a huge
Absolutely.
difference. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's why we need so many more positive queer representations in media, like
Yeah.
this book, where Nima is just out and she's like, yeah, I'm out. It's not a big deal. She doesn't really come out, people are just like, oh, this, and she's like, yeah, I guess. Um, yeah, it's incredibly important for us to create positive queer stories for not only our youth, but also ourselves. I feel like maybe if I had written this story, it would have also, just reading it was a healing process. Writing it would have probably felt like,
Yeah,
wow.
it felt good. It felt good.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, to put that story out in the world felt really good. Yeah.
absolutely. And it's what a beautiful story to be out in the world.
Yes.
So, for my last question, in case if any audience members have any questions, type it up and we'll post it here.
Yes.
But for my last question, kind of a broad question, but what do you want people who read this book, youth or adults, what do you want them to take from it?
Yes.
I when I read books, I take what I need and I leave the rest. So, what do you want people to take from Kings, Queens, and In-Betweens, or even Bruised?
Definitely for both books that there is so much joy to be had in being queer, like that's possible, and that um that it might mean that you have to look for it a little bit more or find those people who will um, allow you to be in that joyful space. But they're there, and there are a lot of people who are experiencing queerness in a really positive, fulfilling way. So I think that's really important in both books, maybe especially in Kings. That there's lots of ways to express yourself. I think that's really important, like yes, drag, but also like even for Gordon, like he doesn't have to be the person he is. And he just needs like someone to help him get there, that there's some other way that he can be, regardless or not regardless, but in addition to the experiences he's had, it doesn't need to destine him to some way of being. Nima too, like she can be her introverted self still, because I didn't want her to lose that. I think that's a really lovely part of her. And she can also be this other self that she discovers. So that you're never stuck in one way of being.
Mhm.
And I would say that's similar in Bruise too, that the protagonist there finds other ways of expressing herself and of being that she never thought was possible. Because I think that's hard. I think we kind of get stuck in this like I am this way, and people tell you that, or something happens and you make up this story about yourself, and I don't believe that has to be the way you always are. But it does take something to shift the way you see yourself sometimes, or a different experience, or somebody to tell you a different way or show you a different way. And so both books have these characters who come in and kind of either rock a character's world, or just gently, show them a different way. And so we have to be open to that too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, the number one thing you'll hear me say is like, we are humans and we are evolving, hopefully growing up towards the light.
Mm,
Um,
yeah, that's
so
nice.
that is definitely what I picked up from Kings, Queens, and In Betweens.
Good. Phew.
All right. It doesn't look like we have any more audience questions.
Come on, audience.
Um, Come on, audience. Yeah, sometimes people are honestly, if I
Don't
was
be
participating
shy.
in author talk, I'm like, I'm gonna let the author, do their thing, and I
I
will
love
just
questions though,
listen.
so if you have any questions, don't be shy. Anything. Could be writing just generally, if you haven't read the book too, or nothing, huh? That's all right.
We got a shy crowd today.
It's all good.
All right. Well, let's like sign off by how people can find you. Do you like you have a website? Like plug yourself in here.
Yeah, I do have a website. It's just tanyaboteju.com. And you can contact me through that. You can email me. My email's there. I am on Facebook, but I know younger people don't really do Facebook anymore. I'm on Instagram. I actually am just like, as of yesterday, taking a little hiatus just because everything that's happening right now, it feels very overwhelming. And like Texas right now, I just had to take a step back. So I'm not on it at the moment, but my account's there. And so that's a great way. I'm pretty good at getting back to people and stuff. If you want to message me there, or just email me. If you have questions that you didn't want to ask, you're too shy to ask, you can certainly email me. I'm very good about getting back to people. But yeah, those are the main places. Instagram, I would say, and my website.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, I'm so happy we got to talk. This was a beautiful discussion. This was a beautiful book. I'm so glad I got the hard copy instead of the ebook because now I get to cherish it forever. Um, and just think about my very first author talk, and how beautiful it was.
Well, I'm very, very honored that I was your first author talk, and I'm really so thankful that you read the book. I really appreciate that, and that you reached out so I could have this awesome conversation with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for creating it. Thank you for creating this beautiful, beautiful work. I'm sure a lot more people will be inspired and healed from it just as much as I was. So
I hope
I
so.
really appreciate it, Tanya. Thank you so much.
Thank you.